Welcome to the Legal Insurrection Podcast. Today is October 24th, and in this episode, we'll be discussing Doug Emhoff, all of the last-ditch efforts, all of the nasty stuff that they're throwing at Trump. We'll also be talking McDonald's and Trump-mentum. I'm Kimberly Kay. I'm the editorial and operations director of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with our president and founder, Professor Jacobson. So let's go ahead and jump in. Well, first of all, hello. It's just us this time. It was really fun to be able to talk to Mark Mitchell from Rasmussen Reports, now that we know it's actually Rasmussen and not Rasmussen, which is how I've said it in my head for years now, in our last episode. So that's just my not so low-key pitch to check out that episode if you haven't listened to it yet. We were able to speak with him last week, and he had just very insightful, very informative, very enlightening things to say about the state of polling, his prognostications about the elections based on actual data, not intentionally skewed data. So very interesting if you haven't heard that yet. But let's go ahead and get into today's headlines. First and foremost, Obama's back on the stage or back in the headlines and just can't seem to figure out how things came to be so bitter and so divisive. I mean, I struggle to imagine how someone who told half the country to get to the back of the bus is not understanding how we got to this place, but here we are. So what were your thoughts upon seeing that?
Yeah, well, I thought back to the first and the third posts at Legal Insurrection blog in 2008. The first post on October 12th, 2008 was specifically about Obama being unknown, but that his ties were extremely worrisome. And that one of the lines in there, talking about his relationship with Bill Ayers, the former Weather Underground person who beat criminal charges on a legal technicality, but he did beat them, and Jeremiah Wright. And I said, we may know Obama, talking about Obama mania, we may know him better than Jeremiah Wright and William Ayers, or we may not know Obama at all. And I was right about that. And the third post was titled Race as a Political Weapon, talking about how the Obama campaign used race as a wedge issue and also used it to silence people, including Bill Clinton. You remember Bill Clinton's famous line that they played the race card on me and on Hillary. And so from day one, from the day he showed up on the national political scene, he has been ripping the country apart. He's been using race as a wedge issue. He's been using race to silence people. We all remember his famous lines about getting their faces, etc. So for him to come out now and say, well, I don't understand how the country got so divided. Well, look in the mirror if you want to find out how the country got so divided. I think with the benefit of hindsight, the Obama years really in many ways set the stage for tearing the country in half. And he used it to his advantage and to Democrats' advantage. But that's where we are. So Mr. Obama, former President Obama, look in the mirror if you want to understand why the nation is so divided.
Well, I mean, beyond that, we know that he was an Alinsky acolyte. And of course, in the Obama years, especially around 2008, most who were unaware, who follow politics, became aware of Saul Alinskys Rules for Radicals. And that is basically the crux of the argument and the crux of what Alinsky did, and he wrote about extensively, is that he would go into these communities, find wedge issues, and pit people against one another in order to gain control, in order to gain authority and power in that space where they didn't have it before. And so that's why I always kind of cringe a little bit when conservatives talk about using those things against people, because like that's just not the way to do it. It's so gross. You know, if you want to lead, you have to convince people to follow you. You don't pit people against each other and use their ignorance of certain things or their care or emotions about something in order to exploit that for power. And he followed those rules to the letter in every way possible. And so it's not the least bit surprising that that the country is the way it is. Because before Obama, I remember there was at least some sense, there were differences, but there was still some sense of shared values, even though political parties might have differences. And though the gap there was slowly growing and slowly widening, but he came in and blew it wide open, and he did it on purpose. He 100% did it on purpose.
Yeah, and I think that's why we are the way we are, and just looking at Alinskys rules, I think 12 is something that the Democrats have perfected. Rule 12, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. You can look at Kavanaugh, you can look at Bork in the pre-Obama days. You really, not to say that Republicans haven't attacked Democrats, but they have perfected it. And I know we'll get to it later in the show, but that's what they've been doing to Trump for 8 years now, almost 10 years now, completely picking the target and trying to cut him off from support. And yeah, so I think we've answered Obama's question for him, but I don't think he cares, first of all. I think he knows
Right.
exactly what he's been doing. And it was more of a rhetorical question than it was a real question, because he knows the answer to it. It's him.
Yep. And this whole way of thinking that he ushered into the national stage, that he brought with him into national politics, that then trickled down across the board. It trickled down um, into local and state level things. It trickled into broad culture beyond just the political realm. So yes, he's to blame. He knows
Yeah.
it. I don't like the pretending. I don't do life that way. Let's just deal with things for what they are. But moving on, this second gentleman, which is just kind of a ridiculous thing to say anyway, this Doug Emhoff nastiness is just such hot flaming trash. Like everything surrounding this, it's like the trashiest of the trashy stories. And there have been things kind of bubbling up about him over the years, and they quickly get suppressed. And it's always coming from something more tabloid ish, but it smells right. And so now we finally have um, Imhoff's ex girlfriend talking about his alleged physical abuse. And so, and there were stories about this before. And so, but now we have this, which also makes a lot more sense, that we have this other story about Trump and more alleged sexual abuse from Trump the day before this comes out, which certainly makes it look like they were trying to kill this story by getting ahead of it with some other allegation.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump thing with allegation is pretty pathetic.
Yes.
32 years ago, he groped me while we were doing a Twister game or something like that. Um, and the woman mentioned it, that the year 1993, doesn't remember where, but remembers walking either to or from Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse in New York City. Number of people have posted, and I think they've posted snippets from news articles as well. Problem is, in 1993, Jeffrey Epstein didn't own that townhouse. He didn't move into it until 1996. So this is basically a Christine Blasey Ford,
Yeah.
30, 40, 50 years ago. Something happened to which there's no witnesses. And I just remembered and decided to bring it up, not when he ran for president in 2016, not when he ran for president in 2020. It's this year, 2 weeks before the election, his third presidential election. All of a sudden, I'm going to go public with this. So it doesn't pass the smell test. It just shows how desperate they are, to find something. And the woman has not gone public with her name, but she did sit for an interview with the Daily Mail in Britain, which I presume has verified her identity. And this story's been out there for a while, and no network will cover it. They don't want to touch it, with a 10-foot pole, where some flimsy accusation against Trump with no date, no real place, no verification at all, um, never brought up before. Uh, they run with his headlines everywhere and on news shows everywhere.
No, it's truly pathetic. And there have been similar accusations, and it may have been this one that was bouncing around a couple years ago too, about Emhoff and physical abuse. And if you have followed anything about Kamala Harris in the same kind of way, no major outlet will touch this, but there are many, many supposed firsthand accounts or people with firsthand knowledge of how she got to a place of prominence. None of them flattering. Like, none of them flattering. And this almost looks like a pimp situation. You have this dude who's allegedly slapping, women around, and then you have Kamala, who allegedly, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek, got to where she is by doing certain things. And it's just gross. All of it is gross. But I do believe it. Like, to me, it smells right. Of course, we don't have any hard evidence of this, but it is believable, if nothing else. So,
Yeah.
just so gross. And these are the people who are wanting to be in charge of everything. And
Yeah.
it's just.
And they're throwing everything at him now. Oh, I'm forgetting his name. I'm just blanking out. The former general just comes out in the New York Times and announces Trump was a Hitler fan. Again, a
Oh
guy
yeah.
who's hated Trump for a long time, bumped heads with him when Trump was president, never brought this up before, and all of a sudden it's a bombshell that Trump's all of a sudden Hitler, and it's enough of a bombshell that Harris gives a 3-minute speech about it inappropriately with the vice presidential seal or one of the official government seals at the podium. So, yeah, I mean, they're desperate. They're throwing everything. There's also other rumors, which I won't repeat, that nobody's come up with any proof for. Apparently, there's something being shopped around. A number of reporters have said, Dem operatives have been trying to shop around other accusations against Trump, which nobody's so far willing to touch. They'll find somebody willing to touch it, but
Mhm.
none of the mainstream outlets so far have been willing to touch it. Supposedly, campaign ending sort of accusations. And it just shows how sleazy and slimy these people are. They've got a failing candidate. I'm not saying she's not going to win, but they've got a failing, empty-headed, vacant joke of a candidate. Somebody who, if she does end up becoming president, I really worry about our nation. Not because I disagree with her so much, but I really do believe she's mentally incapable of being president. And
Yep.
so, I think that that's what they're doing. It's only going to get worse. We've still got 10 days to go. They are going to throw everything, all the sleaze is going to be coming out in the next week to 10 days.
Yeah, it's just, yes. And I know I keep saying this, but it's just gross. Like, it's just all gross. And the thing about Trump is, if there were things about him we needed to know that were truly damaging, we 100% would have known before now. I mean, this is his, like you mentioned, this is his third time running for president. There's nothing left that they haven't tried to throw at the wall. That
There's
there's just not.
there's been some funny memes about the Hitler thing. Um, the one I like the most is they show a photo of Trump at the Al Smith dinner a week or so ago. Seems like it was a year ago, a week ago.
Oh, I
Um,
know.
Joking it up with Chuck Schumer. And the kind of the meme is, look at Chuck Schumer joking around with Hitler. I mean, it's just so. I hope it backfires on them. I mean, if you prefer her policies, you want open borders, then fine, just say it. But the smear campaign that they run is so horrific. And it's what they've been doing to Republicans. Remember Mitt Romney, the Boy Scout Mitt Romney was turned into a murderer, okay,
Yeah.
giving people cancer. They're just so sleazy and so terrible.
Who
They
had a
really
binder full of women
binder
and
full of. I mean,
and
look at how
strapped dogs to the top of the car. How dare he?
Look at how dishonest the media is. Go back to that. That's a great one. Binder full of women. Okay. So he made a comment that he has sought to promote women within his businesses, and he even had a binder full of women. What he meant, obviously, was a binder full of resumes. Okay.
Right.
And they turned that into that he's abusing women, and they're still at it. They kept it up that entire campaign. completely dishonest, just frankly dishonest media ran with the binder full of women the entire election cycle. And they still bring it up. If nothing else, the Gallup just came out with a survey of respect for, I forget if it's respect or whatever the term they used, for trustworthiness. I think trust in the large scale media is at a historic low. Very few people actually trust them. Very high percentages have no trust in the media, and the media deserves it. They're despicable people. They just lie about everything. CBS News won't release the transcript of Harris after having cut and pasted answers of hers. Their excuse was, well, we took one part of an answer and used a different part of an answer for a different purpose. Well, fine, release the transcript. Let's see what she actually said.
Yeah.
It's just one thing after another. The Trump Hitler thing led the CBS News yesterday or the day before. I've seen the clip of it. That was their lead story, the article about Trump and Hitler. And guess who was the presenter, the newscaster for that CBS National News? The same woman who was the moderator at the debate for CBS. This is why do Republicans should have to boycott the mainstream networks. We say it every election cycle. Why are you going back to your abusers? And that, it's just so frustrating that it really, I really question whether we can have fair elections, not because of voting machines and things like that, but the weight of the media is so oppressive, is so dishonest. I really feel like it's very hard to say we get a fair shake in this country.
I mean, I completely agree. I completely agree. It's clearly skewed in one direction or the other. And especially looking at media outlets who are sympathetic to the left, there's far more of those. There's far more money there than there is anything on the right. I think there are a ton of people. The one place I do take hope, though, is that at some point they're going to hit a tipping point. They're going to get lurched so far leftward that they're going to leave the general population behind. And I think progressives continue to make that mistake where the gap between, I mean, people who used to be considered left of center are now stuck in the middle somewhere, there, because progressivism has taken over the Democratic Party. That like I said, it's just abandoned so many people, and the media outlets are mirroring that. And I think it's probably a much smaller percentage of the population who is staunchly, adamantly, hardcore progressive, holding and advocating for progressive values uh, than what is actually reflected in the population. But they're the ones that are running the media, or at least running interference for the people who believe that way and willing to do so. So where I do take some kind of solace and some kind of hope, and if y'all are somewhat new here, know that I am the resident optimist, and Professor Jacobson is not. I wouldn't say he's pessimistic, but in some ways far more realistic about things / kind of pessimistic. But I mean, I take solace in the fact that there are so many people who, after 2020 and watching what the media did and watching what the major social media platforms did, just checked out of national media completely and refused to get their news, refused to pay attention, refused to patron or listen to, subscribe, whatever, to these media outlets. I mean, we've seen that all of these major papers, most of them anyway, who have gone so far leftward are in major financial trouble. So I think at some point, unless like everything is finally turned into state-run media, which I don't think is out of the question at this point. I mean, it's practically state-run media now. But, barring that, I think at some point we do hit a tipping point where the pendulum has to start swinging the other way, because people don't want to purchase what they're selling anymore. When you know that what you're getting is just trash, why would you choose to consume it? So but that might be wishful thinking. I'm going to pretend it's not, though. I'm going to pretend that's a real possibility. And to the Trump Hitler thing, I mean, do you want to? I know we've kind of touched on that, but do you want to explain that story a little more? Which just kind of made me chuckle because, what was it? And when Trump was in office, it was a running online joke where people would put Trump and Hitler together and just call it Trump Hitler to kind of mock the people who acted like everything he did was hyper authoritarian.
Every single Republican nominee has been called Hitler by the left, by the Democrats. Every single one, at least this century. And I think going back, that's what they do. That's how they attack people. And, so the claim was that Trump said, I want generals just like Hitler had, and Hitler did good things, something like that. And of course, it was a one-on-one conversation with nobody else around. 5 years ago, and it's just coming out now. There was another thing with the family of a soldier who was killed, not on the battlefield, but I believe in a crime in Texas. And I guess she or her family was of Mexican descent. And the Atlantic, which is one of the sleaziest publications
Oh, they're
out there,
terrible.
owned by Steve Jobs' widow, and so money's no object there, but they lose hundreds of millions of dollars a year or tens of millions a year, and she don't care. So the Atlantic, not with a named source, with an unnamed source, says that Trump made disparaging comments about the soldier and how much her funeral was going to cost. And effing, why does a funeral for effing Mexicans cost so much, or something like that? They have no source on the record. The family is furious because they said Trump never said that in their presence. It was nothing but gracious and kind and comforting to them. Other people involved in that whole scenario said Trump never said it. The family is on record saying that Atlantic is lying. And it's leading all the coverage. It's in hundreds or dozens of newspapers and websites. So they between that and the Hitler thing, that's what's being thrown the last 2 weeks of the election. She's given up the joy. Remember, I'm so old, I remember when the Harris campaign was about joy. Now it's about mud. It's about smearing people. It's about sleaze. It's about accusations with no authentication coming in the last 2 weeks of the election. It's name calling. And frankly, it's incitement to violence. Okay. When
Yeah.
they have so portrayed Trump as a mortal threat to our nation, as Hitler. Okay. And that's what contributes to the atmosphere in which 2 attempts have been made on his life. And I frankly think they're hoping a third one gets made before the election. And I don't say that lightly. I think that's what this is all about. They are whipping their base into an absolute frenzy.
Yes. No, I completely
Like
agree.
happened with Kavanaugh. Remember? They whipped everybody into a frenzy, and some guy shows up at his doorstep with a gun. Fortunately, there were either Secret Service or Capitol Police or whoever protects Supreme Court justices and
Mhm.
stopped him. But that's what they do. They're literally whipping people into a mental breakdown over Trump.
Yes.
And it's not hard to imagine that a third person will now completely lose it. Uh, I don't think we have the full story on that first shooter. Notice how
I don't
that
think we did either.
story disappeared. Okay, some
Yeah.
guy with almost no internet footprint, almost no social footprint, uh, comes within a fraction of an inch of blowing Trump's head off, and uh, it's like it disappeared. We
With
know
all
nothing
the
about the
security
guy.
around, like just climbs up a ladder and hangs out right next to the police.
It's
Climbs up
something
there.
I,
All the
I
people there are
truly
like,
believe.
"Hey, there's the guy with the gun."
I mean,
Yeah.
and just look at the reactions online about him missing.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know people. I'm not going to name them. Who I saw on Facebook saying things like, I bet you're thinking what I'm thinking, meaning too bad he missed.
Yeah.
and so they have completely not demoralized, they've completely radicalized, and created a mass psychosis in the liberal community, Democratic community, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I mean, at least to my view, and this is my own personal view, this is like crossing into evilness. This is not just an opinion. I mean, when I was a kid, people would have opinions about things. I'm from Texas, so we had rules about things that you talk about and you don't talk about. You definitely don't talk about religion or politics, especially at the dinner table. You never asked anyone who they voted for. I remember asking my grandmother once who she voted for just out of curiosity and being like, oh, I'm sorry, I'll never ask again. It's like there were things you just that were your own personal views and it was respected that way. And now we have such just open season on personal attacks and trying to personally destroy people as opposed to disagreeing with their ideas. And we see that mirrored across the board. We see that in higher education all the time. We see this even in, grade schools now, to an alarming degree. And it's, I mean, there's a certain evilness behind some of this that would be rooting for and championing the death of someone, because I can say with 100% certainty that my hope for these people who were actively working to destroy the country is that they come to their senses and they explore within themselves what their motivation is that's propelling them this direction and make a course correction. I have zero harm, like intention or desire or hope that there be any physical harm to their person, their body, their family, any of that. I just don't want them in positions of authority, and that's not what we're seeing from the other side. It is in some ways very alarming, but I choose not to live in fear. It's just it's crazy how quickly things have deteriorated even in my lifetime. Which leads me to another question for you. Um, I don't believe, barring a massive landslide victory on either side, that this election is going to be wrapped up quickly. Um, I don't think we're going to have a decision on election night. I think there's going to be many attempts to at least drag this on so that then the attacks and can continue, the gaslighting can continue. Um, if, however, there were to be, by some miracle, a landslide in favor of Trump, I can't even imagine what we would be dealing with the next day. Because, like you said, they're whipping the base up, the Democrats are, into such a frenzy that where do you go from there? Like, you have a psychotic episode, you have a psychotic break, like, you have a complete meltdown. You can't come back from that and just snap back to it the next day.
No, I mean, and again, I don't use Facebook very much. I use it mostly just to follow, I guess, people from prior lives, and uh, they're melting down. They're absolutely melting down. Okay, they have bought in completely to the Trump is the end of democracy.
Right.
They are using terms to describe how they're feeling as scared. Okay, and the people who are saying that, I don't think they're going to go out and riot. But remember 2016, there were large scale riots in DC. People have forgotten that. That's been completely memory
Yeah.
hold. There were massive burnings of cars and looting and rioting in DC in 2016.
Yes.
And I think with what's happened, it could be significantly worse because the Democratic base, the radical Antifa base of the party, is completely weaponized and radicalized. And I think there will be violence if Trump wins. I think it will be a boon to mental health professionals. Okay, so I have a feeling that psychiatrists and psychologists and therapists who cater to a liberal audience are probably going to be very busy, okay, for a while. But you know, it's easy to laugh at that, but I can't emphasize enough how psychotic these people have become.
It's
Okay,
true.
you know, I obviously will be very disappointed if Harris wins because I think she is a political threat to the country because she's so incompetent, she's so empty-headed, she is so contrived, and she's such a phony. And I think she's way to the left of the country as a whole. But it's nothing near approaching the levels that you see, you know, have been conditioned into people for 10 years of Trump derangement syndrome.
I completely agree. And I mean, I think they truly believe that the world comes to an end, even though we've already lived through 4 years of him. And I mean, I know I'm not the only one who looks at my grocery bill. I even had this conversation with my kids the other day. I'm like, look, 4 years ago, we for $200, this grocery basket would be completely full, like heaping full. Now, $200, I can carry it all in by myself in one trip. Like things are just more expensive because they're learning about money and value of money, and so we're talking about things like that. So we had a small little inflation issue, and we talk about things in terms of choices, right? And so we have our little cash budget every week, and that's part of what we do. It's like,
So we
okay,
use the choice cookies or fruit. Which do they pick?
yeah. I know, right? And so it's like, okay, we have $40. If we go eat here, that's all of the $40. Or for $40, we could get frozen yogurt. We could do this. We could do this. So we're learning at least that there is value and there's choice to be made when it comes to a set amount of money. And so, but we've had these conversations. I know I'm not the only one. I mean, $200 would feed my family for most of a month. And now, especially because we eat very cleanly, that's like a week's worth of groceries almost. And I cook. I don't even buy a bunch of packaged stuff. I make all of our stuff. My kids aren't always thrilled about it, but there's so much junk in our food. It's just the way it is. But still, I mean, like, just to say, there's no way you can look back at Trump's time in office and say there nothing good came of it. We all lived through it, and I know that things, at least for business, things for the individual, things for the family, tech, all kinds of things across the board were far better than what they are now. And it's been, to me, one of the greatest gaslighting campaigns I've ever seen, probably even better or as good, if I'm going to compare, from 2020, where they tried to convince everyone that what they saw didn't happen concerning the election and election numbers and all of that nonsense there. But for Harris to completely distance herself from the past 4 years, I just cannot get my words right today. From the past 4 years, as though she was not a participant in it. She's our sitting vice president, and she's acting like she bears no responsibility and couldn't do anything about the past 4 years. And I understand the power delegated to the vice president is not what it is to the president, and argue that the executive has become far too powerful over the years beyond what the founders ever hoped for. Different discussion. That said, there's for them to have basically, I mean, and this is the way they've acted the entire campaign, that she is not part of whatever's happening. And she begins day one on the day that she's been elected as though she has not been the sitting vice president for the past 4 years and shares no responsibility in the terrible state of inflation, like all these things that we're seeing right now. It's truly amazing, in bad ways, but it's very amazing that they're that skilled at just pretending things are true that are not. So, and I did skip over this. I got ahead of myself and jumped to what happens if Trump wins. But McDonald's, we have to talk about McDonald's because this just makes me laugh. I remember when Trump was in office and he had a bunch of college ball players, and there was a picture of him. They had this massive spread of McDonald's all over some table in the White House, and Trump's standing there at the end with this cheeky grin, and everyone lost their mind that that's all he fed them. He didn't feed them some highbrow meal. I mean, if you've met a college student, what do you eat if you're not eating McDonald's or Little Caesars? Or it used to be Taco Bell, but Taco Bell's not cheap anymore. Or the things like that. It's so we have this whole thing where Trump goes to McDonald's, has a great time, pretending to work at McDonald's or jumping in for a few minutes, and people have lost their minds over it. And I just like this is so amusing to me. Do you want to talk about this story and then to kind of jump to the end a little bit there too? The best part about all of this is the Harris tie-in and how she's yeah, anyway, I'll let you tell the story. I'm
Yeah.
just
So this is, Trump did a campaign visit to serve people at McDonald's, uh, and it was a great photo op. I think a big audience, a lot of people outside the store in Pennsylvania, because that's key swing state, and just got enormous media. Everybody, even kind of, mainstream media pundits, were acknowledging this is, was a good PR move for him, and made him look very good. But they completely lost their minds. You know, people who are supposedly serious, complaining that, oh, this was staged. He doesn't really work there. Well, of course he doesn't
obviously.
really. It was like such idiocy. Their need to tear it down was so ridiculous. Of course he doesn't work there. There isn't a single person who thought he really works there and takes time out to run for president. Of course it was staged, like every other campaign stop. It was, and then you had idiots saying, "Oh, look at the sign on the door. The store was actually closed. They were only taking drive-through, and people had to be screened. So this wasn't real." Well, yes, a guy who's been the target of two near assassination, of two attempted assassinations, and one of them was very close to successful. We're just going to let people walk into the McDonald's off the street when he's behind the counter? I don't think so. No
Also,
serious
hello. Thank
person.
you for explaining how every single photo op goes ever. There's no
Yes,
restaurant people walk into where they like Secret Service hasn't cleared and screened and vetted.
yeah.
That's just the way it works.
And the people were screened before they could do the drive up window. Well, yes, of course. You don't want the guy who was just on the golf course, driving up with his weapon. So I mean, but it was just so pathetic. And this is what we talked about earlier. What does the media and the Democratic operative teams do? They go after the store. Somebody dug up that the store had a health code violation. Okay. So it's not enough to criticize Trump, to call it a stunt, et cetera. They need to go after the store, for the franchise owner. And that's what they do. They always do that. They're malicious people. It's really terrible. I mean, getting back to Obama, remember Joe the plumber, what they did to him
Yes.
because he asked a question during an Obama campaign stop. Uh, you know, their need to destroy people, it's just so terrible. And it's successful in many ways. People don't want to participate, don't want to go public. How many other restaurants are going to host Trump there? So I think that it just, but that's the story. The story is they're still angry about it, they're still obsessed with it. But it was a great photo op. I mean, it was perfect in many ways. It allowed him to be a little bit theatrical, allowed him to be the showman, in the window and handing over the fries and doing the fry cooker and all that sort of stuff. So, they they were very angry about that, but they're really not angry about him visiting McDonald's. They're angry because they perceive the election slipping away from them, and
Yes.
that's really it. We don't know who's going to win. Uh, and I think it's very dangerous to get overly confident. I'm afraid
Agreed.
there's a little bit of giddiness on the Republican side because a lot of the early voting numbers and mail ballot returns are looking very promising. The polling, for the most part, and there are always outliers, but for the most part, the polling shows Trump either slightly ahead in the key swing states or it's basically dead even. But we all know from past, assuming this year's cycle is similar to past cycles, that there's always an undercount of Trump votes. So, you know, if so, if Hillary was ahead in Pennsylvania, I forget what it was, 4 or 5 or 6% in the polls and still lost. Okay. If Harris is just tied, that could be devastating. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they see it slipping away. They realize their, very carefully planned out maneuver of removing Biden and installing her without giving anybody else a chance, anointing her, may be backfiring. And uh, it's going to be a long 2 weeks for Trump, but it's going to be a long 2 weeks for her also. And a lot of people have voted. I sent in my ballot. In I think it was Nevada. There's a guy who tracks that, and he's very astute on Nevada politics. And what they're seeing now is unprecedented. Republicans typically go into election day in Nevada uh, way down in the votes that have been cast. Now, he doesn't know how the votes have been cast, but he just tracks it by party, figuring party identification may not identify how a specific individual votes, but as a group, it pretty much tracks. And so Democrats in Nevada go into election day with what he calls the Clark County, which is Vegas, firewall, with a huge lead on the early vote and the returned mail ballots. And then the rural areas come in, and can they overcome the Clark firewall? And they frequently don't. Okay, they fall short. This year, for the first time ever, and it could change in the next 2 or 3 or 4 days, Republicans are actually ahead in the early vote. So when I say early vote, how many Republicans have voted? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and how many Republicans have returned? There is no Clark firewall. And he's saying he's never seen this in all the decades he's covered it. Now, voting patterns may have changed. It may be that Republicans are now turning out more heavily before election day and they won't get that huge election day surge. We don't know. But what I'm saying
Well,
is you see
Trump has encouraged that, right? Trump, unlike last or previous elections, he's encouraged people to get out and vote
yes,
early.
because he realized that was a huge mistake in 2020. That was a huge mistake to discourage voting by mail. And so what I'm saying is they're seeing things, really bad signs, and I think they're getting angrier and angrier. I don't know what they're going to come out with the next 10 days, but it's going to be a doozy. Okay, it's going to
Hold
be a
on to
doozy.
your hats as we stay
Right.
down here. And put on your boots because it's about to get thick.
They're getting
But
very nervous. They're getting very nervous. People like Mark Halprin, whether you like him or don't like him, I think he's a fairly down the middle guy. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but he strikes me as at least trying to be a fairly down the middle guy. And he's
right.
saying if voting patterns continue, not just in Vegas, in not Nevada, but in Philadelphia, if the mail ballot returns by party, again, we don't know how a specific person voted, if all those things continue on the trend that they've been, he said this election's over before election day.
Yeah.
Now, I think that might be a little optimistic. I mean, he's not saying he's for Trump, but I'm saying that might be a little bit aggressive. But Democrats are getting seriously worried. They're going to have a Beyonce concert in Houston. I'm not sure why Houston. She's not
She's
winning Texas.
she's from. Well, that's where she's from. So I don't.
Yeah, but
And
still,
Harris
you
County.
think you would do it. This is like not picking Josh Shapiro for the VP nomination.
It's true. It's
The
true.
single
But
most important swing state. You don't pick the very popular governor. You pick a bozo. I mean, who makes her look like a member of Mensa. That Walls we haven't even talked about this session. We've talked about him before, but you would think she would do it in a critical swing state. Do it in Philadelphia, for God's sake, not in
right.
Houston, where she has no chance of winning Texas. Something's wrong with that campaign.
Well, so the only thing I can think, at least just off the top of my head, is that Houston's located in Harris County, which is the most populous county in the state of Texas. And there is a saying in Texas politics that, whichever way Harris County goes, so goes the state. It's also insanely corrupt. And
But
I didn't
you're in
realize.
Texas. She's not winning Texas,
No,
okay?
she's not winning Texas.
So why
She's
are
definitely.
you having your marquee campaign event in the closing 2 weeks in a state you can't win?
The only and again, the only thing I can think is long game. I think they're trying to taunt, and I think they keep pushing this idea of flipping Texas and turning Texas. But if your immediate goal is to win an election in 2 weeks, I'm with you. This makes no sense.
I
I
mean,
can understand
Philadelphia would have
some
been
of
completely
the reasons.
logical. They would have
Mhm.
gotten a big crowd. They need a big Philadelphia turnout for her to have a chance of winning Pennsylvania. I just don't understand it. I don't understand their campaign.
Yeah, I don't either. But I don't know that I really want to either. Um,
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Trump's going to be in New York this weekend, which to me makes a lot more sense. Like there is a possibility in New York.
Yeah, I mean, so that's true. That's kind of the equivalent of her going to Houston, except he has had many events. Okay,
Yeah,
and New York is really the national media hub. As long as I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but since we deal
it
with the
is.
media a lot, New York is where the media is. Okay,
Yes.
and the optics of him filling Madison Square Garden. Um, I think will be much better than the optics of her filling wherever she's doing it in Houston. No
Oh,
offense to Houston, but it's not going to have the national impact. And I also think, unlike her, I think he is playing a little bit of the longer game that he wants to carry he wants to get the House.
yeah.
Okay. If he wins, he knows he has to have the House. And New York State, people may not realize this, in many districts is very competitive for Republicans.
Yes.
Basically, Republicans, and I might be slightly off on the numbers, um, won, I think, 4 or 6 upstate districts and downstate, Long Island and upstate. And that was the difference between, Republicans holding the House and losing the House. It was Florida and it was upstate New York. There were some redistricting fights, and the Democrats tried to redistrict Republicans out of existence in New York, and it got
Hmm.
overturned by the courts. And so the courts then hired an expert to draw fair districts, which they did. And that saved about 4 Republican congressional seats in New York State, having fair districts as opposed to absurdly gerrymandered. I mean, New York, I think, has 22, maybe it's lower now, but they would have reduced Republicans from like 8 to 2, okay, in New York State. People don't realize, people think of New York as New York City. It's not. I mean, obviously, that's where a big percentage of the population is. Long Island is now very red. Long Island has big population. It's very red.
Hmm.
Upstate's almost completely red, except for 1 or 2 districts like Buffalo and a couple of the cities. But upstate is very red, and I think that's what Trump is probably thinking. That New Jersey, there are competitive seats in Jersey. I think that's probably what he's thinking. Whether that's smart in the last 2 weeks, I don't know. So I also do question um, but he's doing a lot of events. She's not doing very many events. So
Right.
for her to go to Houston is a bigger deal relative to her schedule than him doing New York, in addition to the 5 rallies he just had in Pennsylvania and North Carolina and he's this reminds me of the Hillary, where in the last 2 weeks he was just nonstop everywhere, and she didn't visit Wisconsin. So
Right.
why didn't Harris do that concert in Milwaukee,
Right.
right? Who needs Wisconsin?
It's all very strange. I don't know,
Yeah,
but I mean, I I don't know.
yeah.
It's all very strange, but yeah, I don't know. It's
Mhm.
still it's 2 weeks to go, but 2 weeks in political time seems to be like
It's almost
two
down to
years.
10 days. It's a week from Tuesday. And of
Yeah,
course, we may not know that night because multiple states have announced they're not going to have the results that night, which is completely insane. I
there's
saw
no
something.
reason for that. There's just
There's no
no
reason
reason.
for it. I hope whoever wins, it's a landslide. So we're not in a position that it's waiting for the mail to come back in one state to decide the election. Okay.
Yes.
And that so I think that that is something that we really, it's absurd. I think I saw Maricopa County, the biggest county in Arizona. I don't know if this is true, but it seemed to be from legitimate sources, has announced it may take them up to 10 days to certify the election.
There's
How
no reason.
absurd is that? How
Yeah.
absurd is that? And that's just
Why
going
now?
to feed
Why
the
now? All
paranoia.
these years, all these years, we've always been able to have a clear winner, minus the George W.
The
V.
hanging
Gore, the
chad.
hanging Chad thing, which I have different thoughts about, but whatever. Minus that, we always have clear winners in our elections, and whatever it is that's going on with them is very, very irritating. Outside of everything else, it's very irritating. It also undermines faith in the system, which I honestly think is part of the end goal here. I mean, it's all about undermining. When you really look into some of the leftist ideology, it's about undermining institutions across the board. If they can tear down the institutions, what's left of our society? And if people have no faith in elections, and that's one of the things, I mean, as someone who has lived and traveled all over the world, and has friends from all over the world, one of the things that people used to always marvel at, I don't believe that's the case anymore, was the peaceful transition of power that our country had at election time. And there's a reason that's being attacked. I mean, it makes us stand out, it makes us uniquely different from so many other countries globally. And I believe there's a concerted effort to attack that in particular and to drag America down to a level that, we fought really hard not to be at. So, and have fought many wars even amongst ourselves to overcome. So, anyway, but I think that wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for your time. I always love discussing this stuff with you and your thoughts and your memories, your precise memory of all these fun things that have happened over the years. If you are listening and want more information, we'll put links to everything that we've discussed, or most things that we've discussed, because we do cover them on the Legal Insurrection blog. And you can find that at legalinsurrection.com/13. Again, that's legalinsurrection.com/13. If you've enjoyed this, please like, share, do all of those great social media things, because we love to be able to share our thoughts with other people. And hopefully next week I'll be able to English a little bit better than I was today. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.